The special work session, January 19th, 2021, and welcome those folks who are on YouTube. The order of business today is wind energy regulations, and I have a few comments to make to start with, but the order after that will be a brief 30,000 view from Don and Mark with regard to how we got where we are today. And then I'll ask the fellow commissioners which way they would like to go, whether they want to just center on the setbacks and the noise and the shadow flicker, or whether you would rather take it page at a time and go down the different paragraphs, okay? And so today it's serious. It's been serious for a long time that Don and Mark and the Planning Commission have worked on this. And after all, we're here as commission to look after the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens. And it just isn't about money, but it's about the health, safety, and welfare. From the Kansas Rural Center, development of renewable energy should be undertaken in a manner that truly bolsters regional economies, maintains unique ecosystems, and avoids marring scenic viewsheds, critical habitat, or undisturbed areas. And in this same thing, they ask people to identify what makes their community livable. And they centered primarily on people, and people are engaged in the community and the dedication to its quality of life. This has to be measured, but nobody measures it. We don't have a happiness scale, though that might be more important than a gross domestic product. And there was a seminar that Commissioner Sellers and I both attended a while back on communities and what makes a thriving community put on by the Hutch Community Foundation and the Chamber. And whereas there are communities all over the county, in Hutchinson, for instance, there's three different little communities within the makeup of the city. That's Bricktown, Riverview, and Lincoln that I know of. And rural areas have communities also. And in that seminar, remember that talked about the three things that make a community, and that's social offerings, aesthetics, and openness. And of which aesthetics is a sense of belonging, and it's a great place for young families. And a family really like it. Their first thing to go on the chopping block when it's tough is the aesthetics. Emotional feelings make a difference, and people care about where they live. Marcy Penner writes, if you're a rural by choice, I want to be in your tribe. But as we go on this, just keep in mind that communities make the county. We have 15 incorporated cities and 4 unincorporated areas in the county. And so from that standpoint, I'll turn it over to Don and Mark and to give us a view of where we are today, where we started from, or however you want to carry on with that.
Okay, good afternoon, Commissioners. Mark Von Ashton, County Planner. I've got several dates that I can provide the Commissioners to kind of tell you how this all came about and how we got to where we are today. So in December of 2019, the County Commissioners directed staff to begin the public hearing procedure of processing added zoning in the southeast portion of Reno County. At that time, it was discussed for us to consider updating the current commercial wind regulations with the specific direction of not creating regulations so restricted that it effectively bans commercial wind from the county. Any regulations at that time that were perceived in doing so would not be adopted by the county commissioners. So that was our direction at that time in December of 2019. First part of that was we went through the zoning process, and then April 6th of 2020, county commissioners approved zoning that southeast portion of the county. As you recall, there's like a little window in there that had no zoning. So that was the first order of business, is we did that. On May 21st, 2020, the Planning Commission formally adopted a Planning Commission order that kind of outlined the procedure that they will follow to consider adopting new commercial wind regulations. On June 18th of 2020, the Planning Commission held a public meeting in order to receive input from the public on content that should be included in the regulations. And again, this was a public meeting. It was not a public hearing. It should be noted really that there's no statutory requirement that says that we had to do that, but the Planning Commission really felt that they wanted to hear from the public in a non-public hearing setting what content should be included in the regulations. At the end of that meeting, the Planning Commission directed staff to provide them a draft copy of new commercial wind regulations. After that, a subcommittee was formed consisting of Don Britton, the Director of Public Works, Russ Gertson, the Planning Commission Chairman, and myself. On July 23rd of 2020, the Planning Commission reviewed the first draft of the commercial wind regulations. On August the 20th of 2020, the Planning Commission reviewed the second draft of the regulations, and at the end of that meeting, they set the public hearing date for the regulations for September the 17th of 2020. So then on September the 17th of 2020, the Commission held a public hearing on the draft regulations. At the end of that, the Planning Commission closed the public hearing portion of that meeting, but continued the case to the next month in order to review all the public comments and all of the public information that was submitted at that hearing. At a special meeting of the Planning Commission on October 13th, 2020, and a regular scheduled Planning Commission meeting on November the 19th of 2020, the Planning Commission reviewed all the documents and all the public comments, and they made changes to the original draft regulations. Finally, on December the 17th of 2020, the Planning Commission reviewed that draft document. They made a couple of minor changes to that draft, and then at the end of the discussion, the Planning Commission recommended approval of the draft document that is before you today, and that vote was 5-1. So that is kind of a timeline of how we got to where we are today, Mr. Chairman. So if you have questions on that timeline, I can certainly answer those.
Mr. Sellers, any questions? That's a good, Mr. Friesen?
None yet.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I might ask Mark, in addition to the information received at the public hearing, was there an opportunity for interested parties to submit written information?
Yes, there was.
Recommendations?
Yes.
And what was that period of time prior to the public hearing?
Actually, it was way before. It started in March of 2020, and really it went all the way through the close of the public hearing in September. So at that time, we were accepting written documents, written comments from the public on ideas or thoughts that we should consider with these new regulations.
And that was considered in addition to the oral testimony and other documents provided at the public hearing?
It was, yes, yes. And that is what is currently in the blue folder that's sitting off the corner of the desk right there. That's the public record of these regulations.
And the information that was provided written-wise was available to the commission as well as the planning commission. All of
Yes.
that was available, and they had a choice whether they wanted to read through all of that or not.
They did, yes. They did. Yep, all the emails that were received were also sent to the planning commission either by electronic or in paper copy form. Anything that was submitted at the public hearing was also copied to them if there were not copies available at that public hearing and submitted. So yes, the planning commission received all of that documentation.
All right. So I would ask the commissioners, how would you like to proceed with this? Do you want to go through this document kind of item by item? Or shall we just look at certain areas that you might want, like setbacks, noise, and shadow flicker? You want
Well,
to?
Mr. Chairman, I think the three items you mentioned are the most important, but for me to feel like I'm fully updated from what we were addressed with 2 years ago, it would seem like to me if we could briefly have the planning department tell us page by page the significant changes from what we had 2 years ago, but where a request was eventually denied. Is that possible, Mark? The significant, I don't want to talk about ifs, ands, and buts, but the significant changes that were made to this document that's in front of us today from what we would call the prior to December 2019 document.
Mr. Sellers, would that also include Mr. Van Atchen telling us the source of the information that he and Mr. Britton and the committee used to put these together? I think that would be helpful.
There's one thing I'd like to mention so that you'll know. The regulations we have now is 14 pages long, and the regulations, the first regulations we had was 2 paragraphs long. So we went from 2 paragraphs to 14 pages. And I have those 2 paragraphs if you want those, but I just want to let you know that that's what we went to.
We've been sent those.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe I could add on to that, because I had the same question Commissioner Sellers had, and Randy said the same thing. You said, Don, that we started out with essentially nothing and ended up with, a dozen pages or so. But it seems like a lot of what's in here was discussed through the CUP process. Can you kind of tie that together? Because I think that's the point Commissioner Sellers is talking about. Maybe I'm missing something, but it seemed like there was talk of all of these issues in the first CUP process. Was that just people bringing those issues up and discussing, or?
I think that
Yeah,
was primarily
it was. It was a lot of those issues that were being brought up, a lot of the sources of my information came from comments and documents that were received during the public meeting, electronic submissions. But a lot of what we went into our research here with the subcommittee really was just trying to get an understanding of what other counties are doing throughout the state of Kansas. I expanded my research to look and see what other states are actually doing. And as you may or may not know, some states choose to regulate commercial wind on their own. Some states do not. And so a lot of my research was just centered on what other states are using as their guidelines as well. And that's how really this document started coming together at that point, was just seeing what other counties and other states were using, and also relying on the documentation that was submitted. But I think overall, though, you have to keep in mind as well, the charge to our committee and also the charge to the planning commission was to not be so restrictive and bring this governing body a document that essentially was banning commercial wind from the county, because that was not what the direction that was given to the planning department. So we had to also keep that in mind as well.
The original was woefully missing when we got more knowledge about the wind energy conversion systems and the companies that do those.
So what did the planning commission use as their basis for decision-making in the first CUP?
They were using the current regulations as a basis here and weighing the evidence that was submitted at the public hearing. In our current regulations, we have a section in the back, it's under Article 20, where it gives the planning commission and the governing body the latitude to be more restrictive or less restrictive with any kind of conditional use permit application that comes before before the board. And so it was very difficult, I think, for the planning commission to render a decision on this case because of the fact that we did not have very good guidelines with our regulations, and the fact that we can modify more restrictive or less restrictive based off of something that is submitted here. And so the basis of their decision started with the regulations, but also the evidence and the testimony presented at that public hearing.
But Mark, how did they do that? They did that through conditions that they attached to their recommendation. That's how those individual issues were addressed, and
Right.
I talk about that.
Yeah. So, in looking at that application, the board felt that if we can attach certain conditions of approval, like with any type of conditional use permit application, then maybe that application could be approved if an applicant followed through and did certain conditions that are permitted with a conditional use permit application.
What matters were generally addressed as conditions, such as?
I mean, such as setbacks, such as the shadow flicker, the noise.
Was there like a general list? I mean, I know sometimes in zoning regulations, there's kind of a criteria of 11 general criteria. Did they use that
Yeah.
as a basis?
So that's the other
Is it 11?
basis. I mean, they looked at, are there conditions of approval that can we place on this to possibly approve it? The other thing is they use the factors which you're referring to, or the golden factors, and that is really the base. That is really the only criteria that they should be using in conjunction with possibly attaching certain conditions that could make this work, or not. Yeah, all planning decisions really have to be based off of those factors, and those factors are contained in our regulations.
And this doesn't change those overarching factors, or?
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not.
Mr. Chairman, I have some general thoughts, but whatever.
Do they apply to any specific?
No, they're kind of more general, so I don't know if we want to do that last or first.
Let's just start through this, and I think you requested that any major changes as we go through this, and then if you've got a general something that applies to this, why bring it up, and then we'll contain that, and then if it isn't brought up, you can bring that up towards the end. How does that sound?
Well, I might clarify, I mean, part of my thinking on this is just understanding whether this is the correct avenue in general for commercial wind systems, and so I'm happy to go through it, but it's more of an overarching concept. So
Okay.
it's up to you, of course.
All right, let's start in, and Mark and Don, you can, purpose and intent, there's really, tell me if there's something on this that has major changes, okay? I think we've all had a chance to read this. So, 23-101's purpose and intent, 23-102's applicability. Then there's 23-103 as definitions. And you made some changes there in making just one word turbine fit all the complete unit, right?
That was one of the last changes that the planning commission made to the document. They wanted to have a definition of a turbine, and that was related to other sections of the regulations that got changed. So it necessitated the need to be able to have a definition of a turbine, what that actually means.
23-104 is circumstances requiring application of the CWAX article.
This talks about when a conditional use permit is required, so it requires a conditional use permit under this proposal.
23-105 is content of a development plan and plan of operation.
Generally, this is what the company in our conditional use application process we went through, they fairly well satisfied 23-105 because that's what's done in the industry. And so I suspect that had some bearing on the content of this. I mean, that's what is done.
Yeah, it did. It did have a lot of bearing. The application went way above and beyond really what our current regulations, required. So we use that as a basis to continue that and require those minimums. And so what you're seeing here are some of the basic information that we would need to be able to review an application. It's certainly not limited to something like you see here in that article. We require more information if needed, and so can the governing body at that time when it gets to your level.
And I think I read this last sentence in the first paragraph. The Planning Commission or Board of County Commissioners may require additional information not listed below. And I can about guarantee you that there'll be some things on there that will be added.
Similar to any kind of conditional use permit, each case is unique and it presents its own unique set of circumstances. And so that's why we have that sentence in here to say we need this information to be able to adequately review a case.
And it'll be defined further as the development agreement. Should a project come, the development agreement would get me a lot more specific than just these general items here. 23-106, documents, plans, studies, reports, other permits.
Again, these are documents that we would like to have submitted to be able to thoroughly review a proposal. None of these documents were required under our current regulations. And so these are added reports to help us review an application.
I only had one thing that I wrote down here on this is anytime a third party is used, that I felt that third party should be approved by the county commission rather than left up to a developer, so that we would have knowledge and some background.
That would be determined by the development agreement by the Board of County Commissioners and staff if they chose. So you would choose who that third party would be.
I'm wondering if this is at the preliminary stages, is it not? That the third party would apply to what type of documents? Do you recall? I mean, I know that.
Acoustic study, shadow flicker, economic impact, birds, et cetera.
So,
And that's why I thought maybe it just should have it in there to define how that third party is, rather than go in the development agreement.
I think that was sort of my point, Don. You don't want to have if you can raise an objection or concern to the qualifications of the third party, you'd like to do that early in the process rather than after it's gone through everything and it comes to the board. So I would think, Mark, that you would review that and I mean, reviewing the application and the documents is a fairly lengthy process. And if you had some concerns, or you could, as a routine matter, bring it to the attention of the county commission who's doing that and make some recommendations. So if there were some objections, they could be made in timely fashion. Would that be acceptable?
Somewhere other, it should be brought to the county commission for approval of the third party. I don't
Well,
care whether
Mr.
that's.
Chairman, couldn't that, I agree with what you're saying, and I think it could be used in preliminary and then in the final agreement with the wind organization, but couldn't we cover that by slightly modifying or possibly modifying what the definition of a qualified third party is. That person would be somebody that's agreeable to by the county and the applicant. Number 4 under definitions.
That makes,
That's fine with me.
I
just
agree
think
with
it-
you that for, if I'm the wind applicant, I go out and pick Randy to be the third party, we might have some questions about that. But if we nip that in the bud and that party is agreeable to both the planning department on an application and the county on a construction permit, I'm not quite using the right words.
Just an example of bird study, you know? That's one example.
I think that's a,
You know,
a good
pick your own
recommendation.
study that you want to use.
Well, the criteria is actually set out in paragraph 3 as to what constitutes but I'm looking at non-participating landowner. Well, I'm looking at 4. It's an entity that is not owned by or operated by or a subsidiary of the current owner, or of that is the applicant is who you're talking about, Prairie Wind, but that, in the case of the last, or a property owner within the project district who's qualified to perform the required analysis. So it's fairly specific. I mean, there's not any other criteria that if we're going to define this and you want other criteria to come into play, I think it needs to be in this definition.
No, I don't have any trouble with the criteria. I just think that the commission should know a little bit, both the planning commission and the county commission should know a little bit about that third party before it's
well, I think if you want to do that, you need to reserve the right to reject the third party, or it doesn't really do you any good, because this is a definition, but it's pretty much, I mean, I suppose we could determine whether somebody's qualified, or staff could.
right to reject a third party. Is that what you're saying?
Is that fair, if the staff could determine what qualified means during the process?
If who would determine that?
Staff or commission?
I think with respect to third party or third party companies, I think that would come within this. I think a communication from the county planner or public works director to the county administrator, identifying who this party is and the qualifications and concerns or recommendations with whether or not the staff thinks that they're qualified or not, and send that to the county administrator, and early on have that as a matter of discussion, perhaps even potentially, I don't think it's an executive session, but I think, as you said, Mr. Chairman, getting that communication early in the process, and if there appears to be a problem, bringing that to their attention, because it's going to affect the end result of the applicant if they're going to use third parties in material circumstances which are not acceptable. In the end, that could be the basis of a denial, and I would think that they probably would want to know. I mean, I think that would be worked out. Does that work for you, Mark?
It works, yes.
Don? With that,
It's just as long as we have an operator. I think the commission should have the
Let's don't get
opportunity.
bogged down on this, but let's work on the definition of a qualified third party acceptable to the county.
And then I would say that we would want to change anytime third party is referenced, to reference that definition, because it's not,
Several times in here.
it's not using the same definition. It's in section 23-106, it's references a independent third party lowercase, but there's a defined term in 103 called qualified third party.
I think we can work on that wording. It may be satisfactory, don't you, Commissioner?
I think Commissioner Seller's recommendations, the last phrase, who is qualified to perform the required analysis and is acceptable to the county. You add those words, that cover it, and it can be covered in the manner that we discussed.
And then just bringing that definition forward throughout.
Yes, and I I didn't realize that that appears somewhere else. If that certainly should be consistent.
All right?
I think the words acceptable to the county appear in various places in here for reasons like you said.
I also think that every time we mention a special flood hazard areas, that there ought to be something regarding FSA or the, regarding wetland areas. I think that's, there's wetland mentioned in here once, but I just think those should be identified by the appropriate parties and any influence it might have, whether they approve it or not, to go through or to build in. I don't think they can build in anyway, but at least something regarding the wetlands documentation. I know as ag producers, and I'm sure Dawn's has to do this too, that we have to comply with any wetlands areas on our farmland.
Would that be as to paragraph 8 under Article 23-105?
Yes, 20, I was looking at, yes, 106, but, yeah. That's fine, yes. That saves putting it in everywhere, every time, doesn't it, Mark?
Yeah, that's what we were thinking.
Okay. All right. Okay, additional, any other questions on that or any other comments? 23-107, additional required topics to be included in submittals.
Let's discuss item 2, setbacks.
Yes. I know it was a split vote. 2, 5-1.
It was
On the
5-1 on the decision, but it was like a 3-2 vote a lot of times on
It's 3-2 on
setback
setbacks.
requirement.
So
Yes.
that's what I was referring to, just setbacks, Dawn. I know Pratt has 2,500 feet. There's the county. Well, I'll jump right in. Nobody else is saying anything. I would suggest that it's included 2,500 feet or 5 times the height of the turbine, whichever is greater, from property lines. And the reason I say that is because I think you can have waivers involved in this. Any landowner may negotiate to waive the setback requirement. So that basically a non-participating landowner or a participating landowner can negotiate to waive that setback requirement of 2,500 feet.
May I suggest to you that, and please understand, I understand your concern for the subject you're raising and others that you might have. I'm wondering if this is the occasion for us to resolve some of those details. I think the real occasion to do that is when this comes before you formally in a public meeting, and perhaps even at that public meeting, you may take public input if you decide it's not going to be a public hearing. But a lot of what we're doing, I mean, if as a result of discussions today, you come up with a final document, then the public meeting is a formality. So I certainly think it needs to be discussed, but I'm wondering if this is the time to do it.
I thought this would be a good time to bring up each individual commissioner's thoughts on this.
Will you resolve them at this meeting, or, I mean, see what I'm
I
saying?
don't know.
Okay. I just, that was, and then it's your meeting. And the concept of the work session we had was that so many matters come before you without an opportunity, something as complicated as this, without an occasion or opportunity for the presenter to familiarize you with what is being presented and why, and where the thoughts came from, rather than to do that at a public meeting in which the matter is on for an action item. You may have it in front of you, but so this was kind of intended to be, of the people who recommended it, this work session to be informative in nature. And there's, again, it's your meeting to do as you chose, but I'm wondering if it might be a little premature today. And
I think if we've got an idea, if we've got some reason to back it up somehow, we could do that.
I'm all for digging in here and establishing some positions that the public could hear today. And I would certainly support not finalizing things today.
Right.
But if we could, we might as well dig in. We already got the shovels out.
Well, that was my thought, at least we could get some thoughts out here and discuss and have some reason why we felt that way.
Yeah. But I think what I hear you saying, Joe, is the public needs some time to comment, and I certainly would want to hear from them before we make a decision.
you're going to have a document published. It's going to be published, or at least the notice of the meeting is published in the Board of County Commissioners. And the document as presented by the county commission will be available for public dissemination.
Right.
You're not going to have a new document as a result of anything which occurs here today.
No. The document that is before the commission will be the one that gets placed on the agenda for action, not any suggested changes.
But copious notes could be taken with respect to the discussions today and those issues brought back on that day to be decided, if you understand the context in which this is going forward.
I mean, I see no reason to have a work study if we're not going to get into understanding why and how we think and why we do that.
Is there any reason why the commission can't redline this and then publish that so that the public sees the basis from the planning commission and then a draft from our planning meeting here?
I think I agree with Joe and Mark that the planning commission has given us a document that we need to consider and say either yes or no to it. And then if we say no, we say yes with the following changes or something. But I don't think it's fair to the planning commission to amend their document before presented to us in a public meeting.
Do we apply that same standard as I mean, that sounds like the standard used for a CUP or an application. This is actual, this is a legislative policy here. That's different, isn't it?
It is legislative, it's not quasi-judicial, you're right in that regard. But there's a statutory process for
Oh, there is.
to getting there. I think it's preferable to do what I recommended. Otherwise, you have your public notice would identify the document recommended by the county commission, but by the planning commission. And then if there's some degree of consensus reached here with not a decision, you maybe have a red line document that's suggested, that's identified as available. And so that, then I mean, it gets a little complicated.
Are you saying there is a statute that's the same in this regard related to zoning rules, that it has to follow the same process as an application?
It's not the same general process of going through the planning. The planning process is generally there, although there are certainly some differences. And I just can't, I've never it's kind of a matter of first impression today to think about having a document come out of a work session of a county commission before it formally received the document at its meeting as required by statute. I can tell you that I don't think that any decision that comes out of that is probably appealable as a matter of law, because it's not a quasi-judicial decision. You wouldn't want inferentially for the public to think that you had made tentative decisions prior to receiving that input if you were going to take the input. If you don't have to have the input at your public meeting, we're somewhat discussing that today. It's not a public hearing, it's a public meeting.
Well,
I
I kind of feel in some ways we received through the Planning Commission significant public input, which created this. Now we're having a discussion on whether we agree with this, and then we're going to take perhaps further input based on the direction we're establishing
As a
today.
commission, we have a choice when it comes to us. We can approve it as it's given to us. We can make changes and approve those changes right at the commission level, or we can send it back to the planning commission with our recommendation. Is that correct?
That's fair.
But
Those are the choices we have.
I mean, isn't that related to a zoning application? I mean, this is a recommendation of zoning rules. It's the same process.
I think so, Mark?
I mean, it's the same.
What's the statute?
12743 is the statutes where planning begins. You know, I think like Joe said, this is a legislative, action, so it doesn't quite follow the same rules. When we have a conditional use permit or a rezone applications before the board, the planning commission will conduct a public hearing at this level. After the close of that public hearing, there's no more new information that is submitted for the record. I take that planning commission recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, and at your level, there should be no more public input and also no more public documents submitted for the record. You need to base your decision off of what was submitted down here at the public hearing. So like in this particular case here, on September 17th, at such and such time, when we closed the public hearing, no more public documents were submitted or accepted by staff. You need to base your decision off of the record at the time before we close that public hearing. Same thing in a zoning case. When the planning commission closes the public hearing, no more new information, and you can't request additional information.
But the question is a little more nuanced, and that is, in this particular case, once the planning commission has made its recommendation, the statute requires it to present it to the county commission. Does that statute allow the county commission the three choices that Commissioner Hurst outlined? Those are your three choices.
Yeah.
It's still the same three choices.
It's still the same three choices. You're gonna get this document as soon as we set the time that you want to review the document at a public meeting. You'll get this document with none of your changes that you're suggesting here tonight. And then at that meeting, you would have the opportunity to approve the document as submitted. You could deny the document, in which case then we have to start the whole public hearing process over again. You could table the document if you still want to, study it, or you can refer that document back to the planning commission with some thoughts. So, you started out talking, Commissioner Hurst, about 2,500 feet and 5 times. If you want to have the planning commission's input on your suggestion, you can refer it back down to the planning commission, and I would, at another public meeting, present that question to the planning commission, and they would discuss that.
Well, let me ask you this then. Did the planning commission review blade throw, the statistics and science on blade throw?
I don't know if they did specifically. They did not specifically mention if they did.
It was-
They were given documentation, if that, whether they reviewed that, I don't know. It was not discussed specifically.
That wasn't taken into consideration by the planning commission with regard to setbacks? Is that what you're telling me?
I do not,
What you said is they were provided information with respect to that, but you recall no discussions from anybody with respect to.
yeah.
I mean, it was there for them to take into consideration like a lot of other information, but it wasn't a matter of specific discussion.
So we can bring that up.
Oh, of course.
Mark, can you give me that statute again, just so, I didn't write it down right.
I believe it starts out like at 12/7/43, Commissioner Friesen.
Well, that's the first of a number of statutes.
That's the first of several statutes that discuss planning and planning processes.
Chapter 12,
Chapter 12.
that's cities and municipalities.
You'll see, and as you go through the statute, though, it also references county.
Okay, thanks.
And that's why, the reason I asked that question is because the setback requirements stated here are nowhere close to what was presented in written form to the planning commission that we got to review. The distances on blade throw and blade disintegration are considerably higher than what is stated in here, and so that's why I asked that question. You know, we're looking at 1,700, 1,900, 1,400 feet of potential blade throw, and that's why I was asking that question, okay?
Yeah. Yeah, they were presented with all the public documents and stuff, you know, but what you have here is their final document. They did not just, you know, include specifics in there with the blade throw.
So that is one reason why I brought that question up.
Well,
I guess, Mr. Chairman, I guess I didn't understand the purpose of the meeting. I thought the purpose of the meeting was the planning staff and department head to review with us the document that the planning commission was presenting to us so that we would understand why the planning commission might have made some changes to items that were on the original CUP, if I'm using the right terminology. And I guess I didn't come today prepared to debate whether that number is 1,000, 2,000 a mile, you know. I thought we were gonna hear the reasoning behind the document as it's presented to us. But I guess I'd still like to have more, if we can't amend the document at the commission level,
We can.
well, but Mark just said we can only send it back to the planning commission.
Commissioner Seller, I think, you know, you would have two options, you know, if there are a lot of significant changes, you know, you can refer those changes back down to the planning commission to get their thoughts and ideas on if that is suitable to them, or if you wanted to, you could just amend it yourself with those
Okay,
changes.
I did not, a minute ago, I did not understand that that was an option.
Yeah, I did not finish that thought, but yeah, you have two thoughts, you know. If there are minor changes in here, this board here could decide not to send that back down. But if there are questions and disagreements on certain items, that then you could refer that back down to the planning commission to get their thoughts. At another public meeting, I will present those specific questions to them, and then at another meeting of the Board of County Commissioners, then I would present their findings on your questions, and then you would.
Actually, it doesn't even have to be minor, does it? We can make any adjustment, a commission can make any adjustment to the document and pass it, or the other two options.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be minor. The thing is, with something as complex as you might want to have the planning commission's input on. what they are, what they were thinking was something, what do they think about a certain proposal by this board.
As well as any of the people that want to address that issue. Right.
This is the
And
circumstance.
commissioners, you know, part of the reason for the meeting is kind of like Commissioner Seller said, is to really kind of go over
Those are the only three things.
the overall, how the document was, I guess, put together, why the decisions were made, because at the planning commissions, 2,000 feet were discussed, 2,500. All these were discussed, I think even 1,000 or 1,500, but the planning commission made this decision, even though it was a split vote. So it's kind of like an explanation so the commission could have that background, the full commission could have that background of why this is the document. And then, of course, have the discussion with, among you of your thoughts on that, whether you agree or disagree. And then, as Joe said, at the next,
Yeah, that's
at a
joint.
next county commission meeting that this is on, then you have the decision to make. As this is a public meeting right now too,
So
so.
I guess at the same time, we can comment, we can ask questions on whether some things were considered or not then.
Yes.
It's 7:57.
I was reading 743.
Pardon?
12743 starts the planning statutes, not necessarily the specific one related to.
753.
So, Chairman Hurst, I don't have a problem of you or me or Commissioner Friesen saying, I don't like A and I'd rather like something else, but I just don't feel like I'm prepared today to debate item A.
Well,
And I accept your reasoning, and I think I hear your reasoning is something about blade throw or something. Is that correct?
that's,
So I guess I'd like to go ahead and see if other things and setbacks,
okay.
any of the commissioners and have the planning director explains any of these things. I was wondering in this private airstrip, C, does that take care of the party that seemed to be aggrieved by the airstrip? Is that a it says here, registered with Kansas Department of Transportation and Federal Aviation Administration?
If that airstrip was registered, then, that should, help that situation with the setbacks that we have.
And we don't know whether that party that seemed to be aggrieved by the deal is registered.
There were some, you just have to remember that this is for zoned areas of the county. Anything that's currently unzoned, these regulations would not, apply to that. So, if that private airstrip is meeting that criteria, then that should help that situation versus what we have in the current regulations, which is really nothing.
To Don and you fly also, is where wind patterns can go up as high as 1,500 feet from a wind tower, blades and so forth can go up 1,500 feet. Is the 2 nautical miles enough on a glide pattern to not interfere? I'm asking that question.
Well, I mean, if wind turbulence went up 1,500 feet and they affected the airplane, then no, in normal traffic patterns, 500 to 1,000 foot. For public airstrips, it's usually 1,000, and private airstrips, it's usually 500, between 500 and 1,000. But, so
I know that
it's very hard to determine what the turbulence are gonna be and stuff like that to protect airports. I don't really have to answer that. This is very normal, the 2 nautical miles from the end of the runway and then 1.5 nautical miles to the sides of any airport. And of course, that, there's no setback requirement from FAA on anything setback this covers anything from 500 foot and above, and you're not allowed to fly below 500 foot.
I'm just curious, because I know that it's pretty well proven that the wind currents from a turbine can be as high as 1,500 feet. And so I was just curious about whether that would affect a glide pattern as you're coming into land, or whatever the terminology is.
Daniel, do you have an answer to that, Daniel?
I mean, it's gonna put the turbines out of the pattern, likely. They're still pretty close. I mean, things look, they're hard to visualize in the air how close or how far away they are. They typically look, I mean, you just don't get close to anything, and, you know, I think you would probably need to ask the airport owner what he thinks on whether this 2 miles is sufficient for his particular airport, but I would say that would be the minimum. Just 2 miles is not very far in nautical terms, as far as 2 miles comes up pretty quick.
I was going to say, it probably makes a difference on whether it's a Piper Cub or a 182 or a Mooney.
I mean, when I'm taking off and I see downwind, if there's a tower and the wind's out of a particular direction, and I know that that's where the turbulence is going to be, I'm not flying into those turbulence any more than if there's a tree at the end of the runway. So all pilots are going to have to, that will determine their flight pattern in and out of an airport.
I know Pratt put theirs at 8 miles, which they wanted to include the whole town when they did that. Okay, thank you. E, F,
I want to step back just 1 second on setbacks. Do you want to know why that they went to 2,000 foot? Is that what this meeting's about, just like that?
I'd like to know why the majority of the planning commission agreed on 2,000 feet.
Okay, originally there was no hardcore setback. When we came with our first draft, those setbacks was going to be based on the maximum sound allowed and the maximum flicker allowed. And we figured that when you take care of those two subjects, then that pretty well took care of setbacks, other than how close one can be to a property line. But the public wanted a hardcore number setback. And so they chose 2,000. They thought that the 2,500, that probably the sound and flicker would take care of that, but 2,500 they also thought was too restrictive on maybe allowing a CUP to come in. But that's, the only reason we put that 2,000 foot in there is to satisfy that there was a hardcore number setback instead of totally determining it on the flicker and sound. Now, this is 2,000 foot, but also it has to meet the flicker and sound above and beyond this 2,000 foot.
So to paraphrase what you just said, is that the planning commission feels that the noise and shadow flicker requirements are greater than the footage that they've got down there.
And they very well could be, yes.
I just felt that compromising is a poor choice when there's an objective method and mathematical way of figuring things. Just to compromise, to me, takes the safety away from it when we've got a method that's already out there engineered. So that was my question, bringing up that setback.
It's just before, with the first regulations, if there was a setback, it didn't protect you from sound or flicker. And so now we're trying to have a setback and a protection from sound and flicker. So, there's people that think we're too strict, and there's people that think we're not strict enough, so it's very difficult to come up with this.
Mr. Chairman, when I was at the planning commission meeting, I hear what you're saying about finding an objective criteria, but it seemed like both parties felt like their criteria was objective.
I'm sure. But without mathematical background
Well,
statistics.
I think there was convincing arguments with engineers on both sides. I think from one side, I think there was comments related to what the owner's manual says, and those seem to quite light for some other evidence I heard from an engineer that ice throw and stuff could be significantly further than the owner's manual's recommendation.
Yeah.
So,
And, you know, there's a safety factor that most of them use, and that's 500 meters from a roadway, which is 1,642 feet. So something to consider. We done with that so far?
Commissioner, there is one error I would bring up that I didn't catch before the planning commission adopted. So if you would choose to approve a document, you know, one of your first motions or so would be to make that change, and that's on the top of page 23-6, it's letter E.
22.6?
23-6, letter E. If you look on that second line, it starts out identified in Article 23-1072E. That letter should be changed to letter D. Before taking this.
Which letter? G-E to what?
E to letter D as in dog.
E, okay, yeah.
Before taking this to the planning commission in December, we made a change and that affected that, and I didn't catch that. And there's some other punctuation, you know, issues still in the document that we'll correct. But that's the main change from the approved document by the planning commission.
Okay, so can we get to Don or somebody explain how you arrived at noise regulations?
I'd like to get down, before we get to noise, I have a question or two. I believe Lisa brought up at the planning commission meeting with regard to Quivira. And so I just thought if this is capable of being for the whole county, that when I talked to Kansas Wildlife and Parks, Barton County set some limits there in Barton County, but also the recommendation by Quivira is they're looking at 5 to 7 miles because of the type of wild birds that are out there and fowl that are out there, waterfowl. They look at 5 to 7 miles. So I just thought if we're going to go forward with regard to the potential to make this county-wide, that needs to be taken into consideration if we go forward. And the other question I had is, does the managed by the Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks and Tourism include those that are managed for hunting areas? The walk-in hunting areas?
Government owned, but not privately.
Not private, yeah.
Private.
Yeah, that was
Owned
discussed.
and managed.
Okay,
It's only managed, yeah.
all right.
Yep.
what's the purpose of H?
And to allow a
You have
city to expand their boundaries without having
the
Tower.
ETJ question.
Purpose of H was to provide, you know, some level of protection to some of the small cities in there. We excluded their ETJ area, as you know, Commissioner, there's 4 cities that currently have an extraterritorial zoning jurisdiction. We did not want to include those boundaries to be included as far as setbacks, so that would just extend that out to where, you know, you would have a turbine several miles from a city. So we just made that relevant to the actual corporate limits of that city.
The city would have the say in the ETJ.
I would like to see extra ETJ and area of influence included within that.
I think
Because they're-
that's what they're saying, but it's not, it's confusing the way it's,
It says those are not recognized in a city's official corporate boundary, so they could be stuck 1 mile out from a city if they did, period.
If the city allowed it.
City boundary, not
The
ETJ.
city would have to allow it in the ETJ.
The county would retain control outside of the ETJ area. Or the county retains control outside of an area of influence if a city would enact that as well. The county does not have jurisdiction inside an ETJ area.
it's not how it reads.
Maybe county councilor can have some effect on there. I agree with you, Commissioner Friesen, that's very, doesn't,
Why can't you just say, no turbine can be located within an incorporated city's ETJ and give it without the city's approval?
Because the county does not have jurisdiction within an extraterritorial zoning jurisdiction. Anything that would be within a city's ETJ would have to go to the city. The county would not be entertaining that as part of the conditional use permit application.
Well, you would want to coordinate that, wouldn't you? I mean, if a city's,
It would be a separate public hearing process and everything. It wouldn't be something that we would,
Mark, that's not what that says, is it?
I thought it was.
it should just say you can't put a turbine in any ETJ,
Well, but
period.
these are the county regulations, and we don't have jurisdiction inside an ETJ, so
What's it saying then?
It's counter, to me, I agree with you, it just doesn't. It says, in order to provide for an incorporated city to extend its corporate boundary and increase its tax base, no turbine shall be located within 1 mile of an incorporated city boundary at the time a conditional use permit application is accepted by county staff as being complete. A city's extraterritorial zoning jurisdiction is not recognized as a city's official corporate boundary.
I don't know why the last sentence is there. I mean, if ETJ exists, the word jurisdiction is there, it's exercised by the city. It doesn't have to be within the city limits. And that's either done by law or by, if they ask for it, Mark, they're entitled to it. And
with Board of County Commissioner
with the
approval.
board, yeah, and once you've done that, then the board has consented to pass jurisdiction over that subject matter to a city. We haven't reserved it for ourselves in any way.
Right.
So any, whether it's our sanitation code, our zoning regulations, or any legislative authority we have, it's only applicable in those areas where we have authority, and by ETJ, I think the zoning authority has been extended in the unincorporated area in the 3 mile. I mean, I think that's the effect of that.
Should it, is it just, was the intent to say, no turbine shall be located within 1 mile of an incorporated city boundary?
Yes.
And then and that's mainly if ETJ is not a
Correct.
factor.
Right,
Correct.
that's correct.
Okay.
And it was an attempt to clarify for mainly an applicant that an ETJ is not an official city boundary, even though it's under the jurisdiction of the city to control land use.
You understand it, I'm beginning to understand it, but John Q. Public understands what that says?
The applicant was gonna have to.
The applicant will have to through, I mean, you have to understand who has authority under an ETJ. It's, you know,
And it doesn't apply to an area of influence, right?
does not apply to the area because the county still retains jurisdiction, and that's the big difference between area of influence and ETJ. City of Hutchinson has an area of influence, however, the county processes the conditional use permit, the rezone. We just did one here last month. And the county still has final say-so on land use, unlike an ETJ. So area of influence was not included in that. But saying that, Commissioner, the city would receive the application for a commercial wind energy, and so they would get a chance to comment on that.
I'm not trying to pick this apart, guys,
No.
okay? I'm just seeing things that I've got to ask questions on.
We want it to be as clear as we can, though.
In I, at the end of the last sentence, it would be appropriate to put "and the development agreement" or not?
Regulation is an act, something that's not advisory in nature, it's regulatory in nature, and I don't know why a county would adopt a regulation that advises itself.
Okay, all right.
I mean, you inherently have that
Yeah.
authority.
I think Joe's right in this case, Commissioner Hurst.
Good, you're gonna
I want
agree
to
with
put
him?
my 2 cents in here.
Mark that down, Joe.
I'd say that the developer's agreement doesn't have anything to do with these regulations. You'll see references to it, but it's strictly a document by this governing body.
I would like to see in item B, noise. I think we could solve a lot of problems if we, instead of saying should consider using blades, to shall use low noise trailing edge technology.
The reason that it was made to be should, I can tell you, was we were trying to provide flexibility to, the applicant. We don't want to be too restrictive, but yet we'd like for them to do that.
I know a lot of places, a lot of other states are making that pretty well mandatory. That's why I was just asking. C,
Is that technology readily accessible to the industry?
I would say yes.
I think I agree with Commissioner Hurst. I think we want the best product put up that's possible with today's technology.
And that's why you see the other half sentence in there where it says, or other available noise reduction technology. It's not saying that anything exists right now other than what's listed here, but in the future, something could be made available here, and we don't want to limit ourselves just to the LNTE. We want to be able to use the best available.
but we could put shall use in there like places should consider. That's give us the best technology available with that option of something else coming along that might be better. Okay, C. This is one that the committee came in with, that was assigned to do the review and so forth, that came to recommend 30 decibels. And it was changed to 45 dBA decibels, and I don't know what the A stands for, can't remember, but in research again that was presented to everyone, that in rural areas, the recommendations have been 40 decibels at night and 45 at day, and that's based upon low wind speeds. And so I'm just curious as to the reason why it was changed from 30 to 45.
Again, I would say that, the planning commission, as they were continually reviewing the document, really felt like the 30 decibels was really too restrictive. And so,
Here again, that was a split vote.
yeah, it was a split vote on that. Planning Commission looked at that, and initially, they liked that, but then when we started changing some of the other sections of the regulations, when you start looking at the whole entire document, they felt the 30 decibels was gonna be too restrictive, but they did change it to an average of that decibels on a 1 hour basis instead of like on an annual basis.
This isn't an average.
Right. There'll be an average for,
No.
yeah,
Maximum received sound
right,
level shall not be more than 45 decibels 1 hour.
based on that 1 hour. Right,
Of any time of the
of
day.
any time of the day.
See, I think there's a difference between day and night, and I think that the science study shows that their recommendations are different between day and night in a rural area. That isn't so much in a city area or an urban area because of the extra noise. Because if you look at the major noise issues in a rural area, they are more nature sounds than they are a city sound. And I certainly believe that any nighttime should be lower than they recommend, than higher, and along with being, instead of the principal building, I wondered why it couldn't be, did discussion go with regard to property line? Because there's a difference between houses and where they sit.
Yeah, no, the discussion didn't center on property lines. They did not go there and discuss that, for noise anyway.
I think that needs to be discussed a little later on. The rural areas has certainly shown that nature sounds are different, and wind makes a huge difference because it covers up the industrial sound, the woofing of the blades. And so I would certainly want that looked at later on with regards to the data that's been presented, difference between daytime and nighttime.
So what was the basis of 45?
Um, 45 was used because they felt that was the number where we are not being too restrictive with that. The Planning Commission felt like anything greater than 45, that's being an issue. Anything less than the 45 decibels, they felt that that's starting to get into the realm of being really too restrictive and not being in compliance with your guidance of not effectively banning wind with the regulations.
We're supposed to be looking at the health, safety, and welfare of our citizens. And that to me is primarily numero uno. And I, here again, I don't think that we should be compromising that health, safety, and welfare to go against other evidence, because there is no set industry standards for decibels. That was brought up, said there is industry standards at the Planning Commission, and there are not. There are compromises, but no set industry standards.
You have various applications that are going to apply to different circumstances. These are intended to be minimum regulations, as to this subject matter and as to others. You have all sorts of authority to return, if you have an application, to return to the Planning Commission with a recommendation. You can refuse it. You can make it a special condition as part of a development agreement, that they meet a higher standard. So whether it's in your regulations or not, I think the regulations were intended to provide a basic foundation for the regulations, and if you find that in certain, maybe you feel like that in all circumstances it should be that. It may not be in certain areas. I don't know. I'm just saying that, but you're not just because it's in your regulations doesn't mean that you have to live with that minimum standard, is what I'm saying, through the process.
When you talk about sound too, it's difficult to determine what's acceptable on the outside corner of your house, day or night. And, because when you look up what different sound levels are, and different people can look up different places and argue about it, it's like a 40 is a suburban area at night. And another study is like 50 is a moderate rainfall, and 40 is a quiet library. And somebody may come up with something different, but that's what you find. So when you think about what that says on the outside of your house, then I don't know. You go to 30 and it's a, according to this, 25 is a whisper. So, I don't know, it's difficult. When you read that stuff and you think that's on the outside of your house, day or night, are you gonna hear a whisper? Or, if it's as loud, nobody wants to listen to a refrigerator, are you gonna hear that on the outside of your house? Maybe you are, maybe you're not, I don't know, but that's what we're trying to base this on. We have to come up with something for the minimum regulations, and then I would hope that you would consider this for a county as a whole.
Yes.
And then if these minimum regulations, if a CUP comes in and for a particular area, this minimum regulations doesn't fit that area, then you can make them stricter. But if you make these minimum regulations really strict, and it goes to another part of the county that maybe is zoned someday, and it's too strict, you can't make it less strict unless you send it back and amend it and go through the whole process again. So we're just trying to come up with something that fits everything as a whole, but then as the CUP is applied for and it comes before you, you can make it stricter if you choose.
I understand that. But I was just going general rural areas. Recommendations that I saw were 40. So that's all I was bringing out. I just wondered what the rationale was.
Do they make noisy blades and not noisy blades?
That's that low, what do they call them? Low noise trailing edge.
I mean, once you apply that standard, it's just the noise it's gonna make.
And based on the noise it makes, it's gonna determine where it's located and the distance, so that the noise isn't so loud at the outside of your house.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that at the end of the day, it's just gonna be a distance issue. You're not gonna,
I think if you go 2,500 feet and use a low noise trailing edge, I don't think you have to worry about noise.
So how does the third-party person calculate this before the tower is in? Is there some kind of sound generation thing that you set out at the site that
Yes.
creates this at
That's
that
the way I
point?
understand it.
Okay.
well, they should just be rated at a certain sound level at a certain distance, shouldn't they?
This is how you adopt zoning regulations. I think this is how you apply it to specific land.
Size would probably have a lot to do with it.
Like, I understand this, but I think it's
This process,
generally
the very same thing as
a poison pill.
this process.
We don't
This
want
is the
them.
test petitions in it, so I think
Set a
that has to
distance
do
or
with.
say we don't want them. Like, I think this is an area that's gonna get gamed in the process for the purpose of being a poison pill, and I don't want this regulation to get into that.
And I'm somewhat agreeable, and that's why I was looking at the fact you make them further. I don't think we have the expanse, the problems in putting those two together. That's my theory. Okay. Is that sufficient enough conversation till we go further? Shadow flicker, number 4.
This is the publication requirement there, otherwise you're giving it to everybody.
Here again, the committee came up with 20 minutes per day or 20 hours per year. And it was changed to 30 hours per year.
And
At what distance is shadow flicker not an issue? You know,
That depends on where the sun's setting compared to the blades.
Depending on the time of the year.
Yeah.
it could be a mile?
Oh, yeah. Mile and a half.
I'm not sure on specifics, all I can say is it depends on the time of the
On the
year.
angle, as the sun just starts to rise, no, help me, Don, Mark, just it says starts to rise, your angle, as it gets higher, then the shadow would decrease distance from the tower. So there could potentially be, depending upon how close, there could potentially be, what, 3 hours anyway?
I don't know, yeah.
I understand the reason and potentially the effects, and I've seen it before, and it is annoying. But how do you predict this? Is it really something you can put in?
Third party.
But this is so vague and.
I think that's a point well taken. One of the things that we were talking and revising and drafting was enforcement. If you make it a regulation, then it's our duty to enforce it because there are consequences for violating the regulations and the building permit. And if you create a standard that's unenforceable because it is so vague and it's not subject to definition, or it's very expensive to try to measure it over a long period of time, I don't think you want to box yourself in that corner. It may be a great theory, but it would be a great source of controversy or difficulty for the planning and zoning department to enforce something that's hard to define. I mean, it's certainly worthy of consideration, but I'm looking down the road, particularly if you had a project in the area we're talking about, I think it's a considerable portion of the public would maybe making a claim that a regulation has been being violated, and then it's our obligation to, in good faith, investigate and determine it as best we can. And I think we need to write it in such a way that we can successfully do that. That went into our consideration, did it not? Your consideration? Yeah.
Definitely, and on how is the planning department going to enforce some of these regulations? When you start making things over a year basis, well, that's a lot of effort.
I don't know, if I lived at a house that was getting shadow flicker, I would want to limit a little bit on how much per day that I'd have to put up with. And I don't know what that limit is. And it's only maybe how many month or two out of the year that I'm gonna be, depending upon the angle of the sun and the location of the, nobody knows.
And if it's cloudy that day,
Angle away from your house or the day, the time of year.
Well, they're gonna have it plotted into a computer model, and it's going to comply with this. I almost guarantee it will comply, but it'll still be annoying to the person when they get shadow flicker.
Yes.
And then they'll come to us and, well, I mean, I'm just saying, I don't know that we know the impact, and I don't know that this does any good. Maybe it's the best we can do, I don't know. It's just.
I would encourage us to leave it at minimum time anyway.
Item C, per year, shadow flicker hours per year, participating or non-participating principal building shall receive is 30. Shouldn't that just be non-participating?
Good point.
That's a question I'm not trying to, as Commissioner Hurd said, nitpick this, but I think anybody that's participating is getting a reward out of this thing, and they understand with their reward, there's some consequences. And so I don't see why that shadow flicker should apply to participating properties.
Well, they can waive it.
Yes, they can, and so maybe D takes care of my question.
But if you took out non-participating, Commissioner Sellers, then they could, then a non-participating owner could negotiate to waive that shadow flicker.
It says participating or non-participating may waive in D. So I think D's taking care of whatever C says. So I remove my concern.
Excuse me, I forgot to turn this down. I'd like to look at the hours at least. I think when the committee spent a lot of time looking at this, that, and it was a split vote, that I think maybe that should be discussed a little further.
I didn't know Flickr was a split vote, but it might have been.
Say what
I
again?
didn't know Flickr was a split vote, but
Was it?
I don't know.
I can't recall.
I thought it was, but I could be wrong.
When we come up with these minimums on Flickr and minimums on sound, it's gonna be difficult to enforce, but like Commissioner Friesen said, it'll, they'll have a model out there, but if you create setbacks to where you have no sound, you have no flicker, then you have no wind. So that's why we try to come up with a minimum flicker and a minimum sound, because like I say, if you set a setback to where you're guaranteed no flicker and you're guaranteed no sound, then you're guaranteed no wind farm, and that's not what we was instructed to.
Not necessarily. A non-participating landowner still has a right to negotiate a waiver, so they could still have one there if they negotiate a waiver. So,
But everybody around them's got to negotiate for something to happen, yeah.
kind of like unitizing, which the original one in northwest Reno County had unitizing involved in that original area that was planned for a wind farm. Any questions on communication lines? Rotor blades? Lubricants and hazardous materials? I presume lighting of the turbines shall and will mean the same thing,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like an explanation there, because I remember when I was last involved in this, the conversation about new lighting detection systems. Is this what they're talking about, is that this is gonna turn on the red light when an aircraft is in the area?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
As I remember all of that and so forth, I think that's a big item, and if that's been solved, I think that's a significant solution to nighttime issues on wind. Okay, so when you say ADLS, the plane emits something that turns these lights on.
Turns them on,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Yes.
State of North Dakota made that mandatory for all new and all existing. Nine, turbines and nacelles. Ten, operation requirements. I had one, that Joe already answered the question on that regarding regulations versus development agreements. So, on 11, ice throw, I'd like to add, which it isn't contained anywhere that I've seen in here, in addition to besides ice throw, I would also, some wording, disintegration, due to disintegration of blade throw. And I think that's pretty well solved by most corporations. Safety requirements, and that's at 500 meters away from a road, because their employees, in case of a fire, cannot go into closer than that 1,642 feet while there's a fire on. So that means if you go 1,642 feet away from a roadway, then all the emergency vehicles could be at the point of entry when they needed to get in. If you can follow what I'm saying, I think that's something that is pretty well out there as far as corporation safety requirements. Away from a roadway.
You're suggesting the curb line being how far away from a roadway? Is that what-
1,642 feet, 500 meters.
From a right-of-way, road right-of-way.
Because their personnel to come in and take care of that, they can't go in. Have to stay that far away until it's done. But I thought just, ice throw, we don't have too much of that around here, probably, not like they do in northern country. So I would like to include the potential of looking at the disintegration of blade throw. Does that make sense? Anything on soil erosion? Here again, by putting wetlands in there, you've already taken care of that. Special flood hazard areas. (23-108), any questions? Any changes, major changes, when I asked that? 23-109? Go through, if there was some major changes, let us know.
I have a question on that. Is 23-109, by its inclusion in here, mean that if the county commission and the applicant do not reach an agreement, that their application for their CWIC is essentially denied?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
This section has to do with your developer's agreement. So if the board and the applicant don't come to that agreement, then it would be denied.
Within the specified time frame.
Yeah.
And that means a company cannot do any start on that.
And
until
get a
it's
building
done.
permit.
Correct. No building permit or anything until that agreement is signed. And then following in that, that just gives the board some ideas of what could go into a potential developer's agreement. It's by all means not, inclusive. Anything, you may have other specific items that the board may want in a developer's agreement, but these are just some ideas to essentially think about. It's not binding, by any means on the board to include this stuff.
Can the applicant request a variance on any of these regulations?
No,
Can,
no variance.
is that specified in here?
It's covered really in the beginning where it says you can't, modify these regulations. It's under like 23-102, is it? We pretty much, what we've done with that is tried to tie it down and said, this is the minimum. It can certainly be more restrictive, but we're not gonna be allowing anybody to make it less restrictive or to be able to issue variances for certain aspects of this. It doesn't
There were
specifically.
certain circumstances that I talked to you about. I had a question because I know when applied to specific land into one location, like a small commercial business somewhere, you got a small defined area. I've seen recommendations from the planning commission that certain regulations with respect to paved parking lots and things like that can be waived.
Right.
That is a waiver of a regulation, and your response to that was, I know that under limited circumstances like that, it can be, but I mean, how do you reconcile this?
Well, like, under that regulation, you'll see a lot of times where an applicant will request a waiver of parking requirements or paving requirements, and that ability to do that is found under Article 20. Right there. And so with that, you as a board and also a planning commission can waive certain requirements. So if somebody wants to build a
Under
manufacturing
Article 20 you
building,
can, but not under Article 23.
but not under 23.
It could be, but it's
Yes.
not. Okay,
That's,
So you're saying because it's not
it's,
defined in here,
it,
you can waive these, they cannot be waived?
it can't be waived.
You could make it so it could be waived.
Right now, it says,
That's right, that's what I don't know exactly what.
Because it says in here that, under 23-101, that is intended that the requirements for Article 23 shall control the interpretation of the regulations. And so with that, Article 23 is essentially a standalone article, if you will. You as a board cannot lessen the requirements that are found in here. You can certainly go more restrictive than that. And so we don't do a lot of variances in Reno County because of that Article 20 in here where, for people would be, for almost every conditional use permit, they'd also be applying for about 3 or 4 variances to get out of paving and loading requirements and especially parking stalls. And so that article helps cover that, so we don't have to put people through another process.
Any other further on that?
is that the intent? And if so, why are we creating regulation that you can't provide waivers based on specific individual circumstances?
With regards to commercial wind, this is a type of land use where I think we want to set the minimum standards that we want to meet, and in this particular case, because of the enormity of it and the complexity of it, we don't want to be granting waivers for this type of land use. Other land uses aren't as invasive, aren't as complex as this, and so there are certain situations in our regulations where we can grant a waiver for parking stalls, and that's not going to be, a detriment to the surrounding neighborhood or to the applicant, and so we can do that in our regulations. This is a little bit more different, where we don't want to be granting waivers from what our minimum standards are. We can certainly go more restrictive if we'd like to.
Anything further on 23-109? Item 1, item 2. I would look at item J on item 2. Why do we say a discussion of circumstances? Why don't we just say circumstances which may require the decommissioning of a turbine?
Where is that? I'm sorry.
2311 at the bottom, 23-11 at the bottom, page 2311.
That was added at the request of Vice Chairman French. She wanted to have specific instances, I guess, of when we may require decommissioning of a turbine instead of just saying that needs to be torn down because it's not rotating or, the paint's peeling, whatever it may be. And so if there are specific instances when we would require decommissioning of a turbine, that should be called out in that developer's agreement. She felt there was a need for that.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
But why do we have a discussion of? Why don't we have those circumstances in there?
Well, the circumstances would be determined by the board, and so the planning commission does not want to give you instances. They just want, under what scenarios are you gonna wanna have a turbine decommissioned? And that would be left
That
up to
would
the
be in the
board.
development
It
agreement.
would be under the developer's agreement.
So why have it, I mean, all of the things that are going to go in a development agreement are going to be discussed among the commission, right?
Right.
So why even have a discussion of?
Would you substitute the word additional for a discussion of? Would that take care of it and still resolve the problem?
Yeah, it's just, that was just the wording that she
I
chose.
just wondered if,
I mean-
because it's all going to be discussed.
Well, I think, yeah.
You want this to be inclusive. You don't want to start listing circumstances, I think, and exclude something, but I mean, so additional circumstances would cover your concern, would it
Yeah.
not?
Maybe I'm being too picky, but I just, you think I am?
No, I think many of your comments are very appropriate.
Here again, I think number 5 with burger strikes, and I think that's covered in here by agreement, but I think there should be a third party approved. But that's it, it would be in the agreement, correct?
Correct.
Okay? And this is probably another point that's gonna be in an agreement, but that's in item 7. Is for the life transferred to the new owner during a 10-year period of tax exemption and for the life. And my concern is in this, and it's probably in the development agreement, okay? But my concern is if they repower one, does that start a new 10-year tax abatement?
No. I don't know, no, I'm sure, that'd be controlled by state law, and I'm sure only one is available. One 10-year period, it might be like an IRB or something like
Can we
that.
protect ourselves by some other method in case the state change their mind? I don't think it'll happen, but if anything, they may take it away, but.
Well, if the state grants it, I think they have,
Power.
yeah, I mean, if they've taken authority, if they've left that at local jurisdiction's discretion in whatever legislation they adopt, it's fine. Otherwise, it's called preemption. They've preempted authority over the subject matter depending on how it's written.
Can we renegotiate a pilot agreement then and have that in our development agreement? That should that happen, that a new pilot agreement is negotiated?
Oh, I'm sure you could.
Okay.
That's an approach that I hadn't considered.
I'm just looking at things that have happened other places that,
I feel that Commissioner Hurst has a very good point here, and I think the last part of that sentence should be during the project term.
Is that defined?
No,
Project term? Is that a definition?
that's not, the project's not.
Well, you need to then.
can we put "and" there, and the project term?
No, it's- Well, project term's not defined.
Project life?
That's like the construction life, service life of a building. It's a very, if I were you, I would pick out a prescribed number of years in which you think it's important to do that. And so, but if you're talking about road maintenance and so forth, I understand what project life means, and maybe we can define that. But I think what he's saying is, should these agreements not, I mean, taking care of the roads and other issues are, they don't go away because 10 years have come and gone. I mean, this could be 90 years.
And I think all that would be called out in the developer's agreement, not necessarily put in the regulations if you want to define project life. You would just define it in the
I think the
agreement.
development agreement
Development
itself
agreement.
could say that. You need to do that. I agree with that. I don't know that it's particularly, because that's, it usually pertains to financial matters, and the agreement itself can talk about under what terms and conditions it would be
Right.
renegotiated or renewed.
Same thing with the road maintenance, you would define project life or how long they would have to.
Well, project life, when it comes to road maintenance, from the time it's being built to the time it's removed,
Right.
I mean, that's
that's the project life.
I think, and if you define it like that, I think that needs to go into a development agreement. I agree with that. I would assume it would be.
So when we start, if it ever came to that, we was talking about development agreement with road and stuff, then that's, would be my suggestion, but if we ever got there, yes. From the time of the beginning to the time of the end, that's the project life, till it goes away. Because they're gonna be tearing up roads when they build it, and they're gonna be tearing up roads when they tear it down.
Right.
And when they repower, and when they change blades, because in Iowa, there's some blades being taken down that's 10 years old.
But anything between the time they're building it, the time they're removing it, that's, any repairs or anything covers that.
Except for taxes, and that was, revenue was what I was looking at.
So I think you all agree that there needs to be a definition of project life.
In the development agreement, I would say. But for purposes of 9,
I'm sorry?
In 7,
7,
under sentence under a payment in lieu of tax.
we talking about 2311, 111?
2312, isn't it?
23,109.
109.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I am.
Page differences and.
Page 2312.
I think it's a small
Page
wording
23,
change, but
12.
it's a big intent change to
Sorry, I gave you back to back.
project life.
Which paragraph under 2309?
Number
7, the second
That's
sentence.
7, okay. Well, yeah. I mean, if you're going, yes, I agree with that.
I think Don makes a good point, is that we're just not thinking about the tax exempt 10 years, we're thinking about the costs and things that go into this during the
Well, yeah, that's the focus on,
40 years.
that's
of
the focus
project.
on, that's the focus on the pilot,
None of
that's
us
not
are-
everything else.
None of
that's
us are
ongoing.
gonna be here to try to define what we meant.
I think that, well taken.
Under 8, I just wonder if we ought to include hazardous material besides just fire. Does it need to be defined? I know it's under the emergency management director.
But isn't this all suggestions of the development agreement?
Yes.
This is just suggestions for the county commissioners to think about to create a development agreement. Not that you have to.
Or prescribe its terms.
Exactly.
Right.
It's just suggestions of of some of the subjects that they've thought about that needs to be a part of a development agreement. You can agree to it or not agree to it. You're creating the development
So
agreement.
the plan is only inclusive of the development agreement?
Yes, these suggestions here for the development agreement has nothing to do with the regulations.
This is a template.
Right.
It's not bad to add more to the template.
You can add or take away. It's not the regulations. It's a suggestions for subjects for the development agreement, topics.
Gotcha.
The second paragraph of 23-109 was at the bottom of page 2310. The following subject matters may be addressed in discretion of the county commissioners, a development agreement or a series of development agreements, and shall not be considered exclusive of all such matters.
All right. Just saw things that I wanted to do, so
Well,
I'm asking.
You know, again, some of the things that Commissioner Hurst has said that I don't agree with, and I want to think about when we're talking about distance and numbers and so forth, but I think Commissioner Hurst is right that the wording in here should be as accurate as we can get it, because we want a potential developer to look at our regulation and say, this is what these people are going to expect. So there's where I'm saying that I think Commissioner Hurst is right on, that 8 should say fire safety, rescue plan, and hazardous material, you know, and how it, you know, that, let's assume that we might have somebody come to us 10 years from now with a project. Wind is still going to be as successful as it appears that it is now. And so I think that it's good for us to try to nitpick some of these words that we're nitpicking today. And I'm not discounting what the Planning Commission did, because they did a good job, and while I'm saying this, I assume some of them are listening tonight. I want to thank them for the document that they worked very, very hard on, both the staff and the Planning Commission, to give to us, because I think they have made significant improvements over the course of the time and effort that they put into it. And they put in a lot of effort, and I personally, and I'm sure the other commissioners, want to thank them for the time that they involved in this. But I don't think that negates our desire to improve the document so that there's less questionable areas 10 years from now.
Absolutely not. Yeah, we want as many eyes on this as we can and improve it and make it as black and white as possible, so there isn't questions. And you know, we've tried our best, and we've constantly wordsmith and stuff, and I'm sure we're still not done.
And just to go back, instead of saying during that 10-year period, saying for the life of the project, that's a huge change in the ability to control costs that the county's going to have with this project. So it's a significant change, I think.
The planning on that issue, what you just talked about as to fire safety and rescue plan, those words may have been in there at one time. I don't know why they came out, but I don't see any problem in putting them back in at all.
Well,
Where it's applicable. I mean, it doesn't hurt anything, do you think, Don?
I guess on the suggestions of the topics or discussion of the development agreement, I don't know, I mean, this is put in there for your benefit to think about, but I don't even know why it's actually even has to be part of the regulations, because it's not a part of the regulations. This could have been something that staff could have gave the county commissioners, but the planning and zoning commission thought about this, and this was suggestions they had, but it's not actually part of the regulations.
That's true.
And so the wording may not be as refined as it has to be, because these are suggestions, and you're gonna create that development agreement with whatever words you want to use or whatever topics you want to use. These are just suggestions.
Well, Don, I agree with you, but I think it's appropriate for us to have a document that some unknown party can come in here 3 years from now and say, this is what we're gonna be faced with if we wanna work with Reno County. And so I think while it doesn't necessarily have to be in there, I think it's appropriate for us to express the views of what we expect to a potential party.
Well, I think that's part of the reason why this is in here is also the applicant's gonna see
Right.
what possibly is very much gonna be part of the development agreement.
It's kind of like when you buy a piece of property, you look at the problems involved with the property, and a developer's gonna come in and look at our agreement and say, do we even want to start this? And so I think it's appropriate that it's as inclusive as possible, and I think you've got an inclusive document here.
I would agree that I think it needs to, since the plan shall address, it already talks about what the plan shall address. If you go by the idea that all you have to say is reviewed by the emergency planning director and within the plan, you already talk about fire, so why not include hazardous material in that sentence?
I think on this subject matter, we've agreed it doesn't matter. I mean, it matters, I mean, you don't have an objection to it. I mean,
No.
no, so I think we're explaining maybe why it wasn't there, but that's, yeah.
I'm just saying, whatever words you wanna add or take away, you can and will.
Okay.
Yeah, and I see that to make it correct in the regulations so that it can be seen by everybody, just like Commissioner Sellers said.
Anything with 23-110? Is there a difference in FAA determination of no hazard versus minimal hazard, or is it just strictly no hazard or hazard? Just curious.
The FAA no hazard is a document that I often get for telecommunication towers. And that means that that structure has been reviewed and found to not have a hazard to air traffic.
So it's either a no hazard or a hazard, right?
Yep, yep,
Okay.
'cause I've seen both.
Thank you.
Yep.
If you don't get the no hazard document, you know you got problems.
That's right. And I'm sure they've been in communication before they even start citing, if there's gonna be an issue. But it's just another document to have on record.
Here again, you've covered wetlands already in 110. Anything in 23, any more on 110? 23-111, construction requirements? I do have a question on 9, and it's more of an information to me. I don't know whether other commissioners thought about this, but I imagine you have in a way. Let's say the transfer is done to a company B, and that company goes bankrupt, or past to company C. Like Ellsworth's these are on their third owner, okay? What happens with all of the decommissioning and all of the development agreement plans then? Is anybody, and if you owned a gas station at one time, you were responsible, weren't you, for any leakage? Is there anything that protects us from bankruptcy,
No.
telling me it's SOL, huh? Short on luck?
Or you talk about an area that's exclusively controlled by federal jurisdiction as bankruptcies, and they're entitled to it, it's fine. I mean, there's nothing you can do about that. unless there's fraud involved or you have objections. Yeah, there's something you can do about it if they don't comply with federal rules.
What
But
if they don't keep up with a surety bond for decommissioning?
that's not,
Well, I think this,
in a bankruptcy context, or
Yeah, let's just say that
well,
they,
then what you do is you if they don't keep up with the surety bond, then you take steps to compel them to do so, and if as a result of that, they claim some financial hardship that means they can't do that, then I suppose they could file for bankruptcy on that grounds, but I don't, then it depends on what a bankruptcy judge requires. They may not, bankruptcy court may not agree with that it's a suitable grounds, or it may say that's an essential part of the project and the project's over with. You need to do that, or you need to, I mean, it's not, they'd have to submit a reorganization plan of some sort that would reasonably satisfy the court, is what I'm saying. And I would suspect if that's not met, that would be reasonable grounds for opposing.
I'm just trying to look ahead if something would happen, that we're stuck out here with 50 turbines, like there's in northern Colorado. That should have been decommissioned and gone 4 years ago, but they're still standing.
Well, I can.
but Joe, doesn't the bond, when it's issued, go for the life of the project?
It should.
To me, it's the bonding company that you have a claim against.
Yes, and I've seen the sureties that the development companies want you to accept as the good faith and credit of their corporation, that they have enough assets to take care of things like this, and I've seen some people agree to that, and but that's not the security that you're looking for.
Thanks for bringing that up.
Well, I don't think you're trusting the wind company here. You're trusting the bond company of having the assets to take care of the project. And that's where, if you accept the bond, you have to look at the bonding company.
But I didn't know how they
Big
were paid,
pockets.
paid annually or paid when, and so that was. I
No,
didn't-
you're looking for a bond for the life of the project.
Where is surety bond addressed?
What?
Is surety bond addressed in here?
That'd be in the development
Could be.
agreement.
I think it needs to be, could be.
But it's not discussed?
No.
Say that again, Commissioner.
Surety bond?
I just propose that this subject matter, I really think needs to be under the category of development agreements, so that all the details you're talking about can be worked out there. It really either is a standalone, but because I really don't think it has anything to do with construction requirements. It's kind of at the end, I would recommend that be placed under development agreements, so those details can be addressed.
I was just asking questions to kind of help understand.
So that condition is binding upon all successors and the signs, and those words need to go in there, because you could have multi-generational assignments theoretically. But I'll tell you what, this is it's going to be a very difficult subject, because it can go out for such a long period of time, and the financial viability of the surety and all of those are in place, and there are no absolutes on this, is what I'm saying.
Present day tear down could be $500,000, and 30 years from now, it could be $2.5 million.
Exactly. How do you anticipate the requirements of that in 50 years? I mean, so the turbine life is 10, but I don't think that they've got 90-plus year leases. I think they're looking at technology and revising these things. I would think as long as wind energy is viable, they'll keep them going. And so that's one of the early things I thought of. Boy, it's an attempt, I think, to do the best you can, but.
As their production tax credit.
Yeah.
Well,
If you're at the end, I have some information with respect to the earlier discussion on the statutes regarding adopting of zoning regulations as versus applying them specifically to one piece of land. And I would agree, I could sit here and have read these things many times, and it is not easy. I think that Daniel 12:756 probably applies to what we're talking about, and that is before any county establishes a zoning district or regulates the use of buildings or land, it shall require the planning commission to recommend the nature and so forth. It goes, and there's a process there. I think that's what we're doing. I think we're changing the regulation, but we're not applying it to any specific land. That would be done with the application for a conditional use permit. That's when you're applying it to a specific territory, and we're not. We're just saying that if you do this, you have to give, so, under the same methodology, going through the planning commission and getting recommendations exists in either event, and that standard is that after you receive that recommendation, you may either approve the recommendation by the adoption of the same by a resolution. You may override the planning commission's recommendations by a 2/3 majority of the membership. And I have a question to ask you about that. Or 3, you may return the same to the planning commission for further consideration together with a statement specifying the basis for your failure to approve or disapprove. And if you do return that to the planning commission, after considering the same, may resubmit its original recommendations, giving the reasons therefore, or submit new and amended regulations. And upon the receipt of such recommendations, you may by simple majority either adopt or may revise or amend or adopt such recommendations by resolution. So you could, what I want to ask you, Mark, is with respect to item number 2, you override their recommendations by a 2/3 majority, and deny it or deny, I mean, and you don't, I don't think, I think to revise it, you need to send it back.
Yeah, you should, yes.
And so if when this comes before you, you talked today about a number of areas, I think, which could be recommended revisions. And I think this contemplates that you may send that back with recommendations that these be considered by the planning commission. I know this is laborious, but this is the way it's set out. And it comes back to you in a format that you can accept or you can reject and adopt what you want.
But in our case, that 2/3 and the majority is the same thing.
Same thing.
Well, but what is the 2/3 majority vote to do, Mark? To override, is it to override the recommendation of approval where your choice is, if they say approve? Well, their recommendation.
Same as a zoning case, when you have a 3-member board.
Well, no, but I mean, what does it mean? The question is, what does it mean when you override their recommendation? Say the recommendations to approve, and that's what they sent. So a 2/3, if you vote to override that, is that a no?
Yes.
But does it substitute the changes? Does it approve a new one, a revised edition? That's the question. Does it just deny it as submitted, and if you want it, and before you get to changing it, you got to send it back? Or can you change it at that level without?
I think they can change it at that level.
Well, that was what you were talking about before,
Yeah,
they
can change it at that level if they so choose. If you want the planning commission's opinion on some of your changes, then you can certainly direct me to take your changes back to the planning commission, and we'll methodically go through every single one of your changes that you have, and then I will bring you forth a report saying the planning commission liked changing the pilot agreement language. Planning commission didn't like this.
But if a majority of the county commission wanted the changes, then change it.
They can, it depends on if
the thing is, this language, I'm sorry, why in the world would the planning commission submit something it didn't recommend?
Or why would the county commission, if they know they want these changes, and this is the way it's gonna be, send it back to the planning and zoning commission to see if they approve of what they're gonna change, whether they approve of it or not?
Well, that's true, except when state laws, if it says that's what you have to do, then that's what you have to do.
Right.
But whether we think it's, to me, I just, you're going to get something, we don't, it's hypothetical what I just said about the 2/3 majority, the non-recommendation. You have something that's been recommended. And so you don't have to worry about having.
And you could either override that recommendation, or if you want their opinion, to make sure that your thought process matches there, then you can send it back for their recommend. It's just an option for the board to do, that's all it really is. If you want
I'm going to-
your 7-member board, planning experts, if you will, to review your recommendation.
I think that they would send it back to the Planning and Zoning Commission if they wanted some more, it studied further, more information and stuff to come back.
That makes sense.
Yes.
I want to reserve this question for another occasion. I want to talk to Russ Avey or somebody about how this actually works.
Yeah, I think what you two are talking about over there is important for us to understand exactly which way you're saying. And you've talked about a couple different ways. I feel it's important to know exactly the process from here. We have a commission meeting and we try to get 2 votes for something. And if those, and I guess what I'm wanting to hear from you, if we get 2 votes for some kind of a document, is that done?
Yeah,
And I'm not sure you're there yet, Joe, are you?
no.
So
my thought is that what I recommend to you, I want that to be legally sustainable. So
Sure.
legislative intent is important if you can figure it out, if there ever was one in the beginning. But I think it's important to determine that, and
I think Russ Avey could help you probably.
I think so. They've,
I think, Commissioner Friesen, did you have some other comments here or talk?
Yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, number one, I wanted to echo Commissioner Sellers' comments related to all the hard work from staff and the planning commission throughout this process. And this has been a long road, and it's not done yet. And I specifically wanted to commend those up there on the stage at the fair late last year that sat through 4 hours of comments, some of them not as friendly as others, and everybody stayed very professional throughout the whole process, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate this clearly, you know, going through this, I think we really made overall some fairly minor changes. This is in substance here, I think was complete for the most part from the planning commission and staff, and so I think if anything, it's you know, maybe too much, and that's kind of where I wanted to have the conversation with the commission on. My one worry here is that we're in a cyclical pattern where, you know, if we fast forward to the end of this, are we back to another CUP that potentially gets petitioned against and then needs a 3-0 decision by us to get overridden? I assume the changes here don't affect that end process. Is that correct? I mean, they could, affected property owners could petition against the CUP and then we'd be back in the same.
yes, that's statutory.
So I think it's worth a conversation, or at least thought by this commission, as to whether we continue to do a significant amount of work by staff, by the planning commission, by us, to end up at the same situation. And so one of the things that I feel may be helpful is, you know, in some ways restricting this and not giving some room for negotiation amongst all the parties, especially including the property owners, and seeking a compromise that would work for them, may be more productive in some ways than creating all of these rules and then ending up in the same place we were. And I don't know when this was started. I mean, this edition is 2016. I think there's probably been at least 5 years worth of work in this. And I think at the end of the day, I'd like to know if there is a compromise for this project. I mean, I heard comments multiple times here today that some of the changes in this document had a lens put on it directly related to the application that's currently under litigation. And again, I'm worried this is all for something that we all know what this is for. This is for an application in southeast Reno County. And so I just don't want all this work to be for naught.
Well, Daniel, my thought on that is that we can't predict what a group of landowners might or might not do with any document that we come up with, and anything that the three of us would do on any item. And I think we've got to produce our best document that we feel that the county can live with. And we're not just talking about this current area that's been the process. We're talking about the whole county. And so if we end up with the same process in this given area, so be it, but at least we've got a document for the rest of the county that the three of us think is workable. And I'm not sure, and I don't think, at least I can't predict with the distance changes that will be implemented. That certainly might change the ramifications of who can protest and who will protest. But I don't think we should try to outthink that. And I understand that it's a lot of work to go through if the same thing is going to be petitioned against. But if we come up with rules that the Planning Commission and us think are applicable to Reno County, we just got to live with the future.
Well, let me pose a thought here. In some ways, I think the way the regulation was in the beginning is just as effective. I mean, if we had the simple regulation, like very simple, with the ultimate authority to negotiate the agreement, then I think you could get to the negotiation and not negotiate through this legislative work. I think this is a quasi-negotiation right here. I think we're negotiating between the landowners and the developers in the end. And I think it's as much effort and as much hard work is put into this. I think it's could fail again. And I guess I disagree a little, Commissioner Sellers, that there's going to be dozens more applications. I think this is one of very few that we have a chance at. But, one of the things I ran on as a candidate was finding a compromise. I'm sorry. So I would like a way to find the compromise and I'm not sure this does that.
I have a tendency to disagree with you on the fact that that's a compromisable piece of legislation. Those are regulations that are set to be followed. It's kind of very similar to having a 70-mile-an-hour speed zone. We don't negotiate that. Those are regulations, rules. And we can't negotiate regulations. This is the way it's going to be. If you want to come in here, it's no different than having somebody coming in and, let's see, how can I, and wanting this is a 4-lane blacktop to their new business. We can't afford it. You know, I mean, to me, this is the way it is. They need to follow these regulations. And outside of that, then there's other areas that add to this. But these are the fundamental constitution, so to speak, of the county with regards to a wet system. That's where I'm at. You can't negotiate. I don't feel that that's a negotiable item. I guess that's what I'm saying. You can negotiate a pilot. You can negotiate some other things. But as far as the actual regulations, there are what is best for our citizens of the county. And, you know, if we were looking at this from the Sand Hills in northern Hutchinson, northern Reno County, I think we'd run into the same situation there as we do here. The reason my no vote earlier was because I believed that the Planning Commission determined that this was not the right location. Now, in the county, I went through this township by township using. Your wife really wants you, doesn't she? I went through this township by township looking at houses located on the map, and there's 8 with, not including the few that are sections that are going to be taken out around Quivira. There's 844 sections that can meet the 2,500 foot from a house and can meet the 1,642 square feet from a roadway. Yeah, there's going to have to be some waivers involved in that, but that's going to be in anything. But that's an awful lot of sections that we can put a wind farm on. And I think we need to face the facts, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, but the reason that area in Reno County was selected was for 2 reasons. Supposedly, there's better wind there. There's good wind, also acceptable wind, up in the Sandhills area, north of Hutch. But it was proximity, and I don't understand why you couldn't have proximity up there to the KP&L plant, but this was proximity to the station over in Colwich. I mean, you might as well call a spade a spade.
But
And so I think there's ample room in Reno County for a wind farm under the regulations that we can come up with.
I still feel like this is being created for one particular project. If you use your example to go out west, I think there are dozens of square miles of opportunity where everyone would probably be agreeable to 1,500 feet. And we're about to lock it in at 2,500 solely because all the comments are related to this one project. And so I think these projects are so far and few between that, you know, I'm not making these comments in order to push the project down there. I'm making the comments to where we have the flexibility to negotiate with the impacted people. And I think if we go out, our county's so big, you go out west, I think that's gonna be embraced out there. And I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit for what you just said out west with this. And at the end of the day, I mean, we all have to be in agreement, all three of us, because I think, fast forward, it seems like the impacted property owners have pretty strong resolve down there, and they'll bring a petition again. And if we're not in agreement now, I mean, I just think I think that we're wasting a lot of people's time, and we're wasting a lot of people's money too, if they have to fight this again.
I think your analyzation of western Reno County may not be as accurate as what I hear, okay? But that's, we don't know, okay, till it would happen. I would like to see this, just comment here, okay, is that I would like to see this applied to the whole county in some method or another. Just the WEX agreement, I would like to see an overlay on, and it would include the whole county. Now, I don't know how we would do this, but I would like some information on that. Application, not full zoning, but I've got enough people interested, I've heard from enough people interested that I think it's worth consideration, and we can visit about that later on. But I think in this process, I think we need to look at the whole county. That's my thought.
I think
know
we
I've
met
talked-
for 2.5 hours, and we're not gonna resolve this tonight. I think the three of us need to think about what we've discussed, and if we need to, we call another planning session on this. It's extremely important.
It is, it's the future. Well, I appreciate it, and I also want to relay what Commissioner Sellers did about the Planning Commission, because there was hours and hours that they spent. We sat in on most of those hours as commission, and it was grueling, and it was tough, and it took a lot of time. And I'm not sure that they got compensation accurately for the time put in. I don't think that sandwich was probably enough compensation. So thank you for that.
Now, is there anything that you're requesting staff to do between now and the next time or whatever? Is there anything you're wanting from us?
I would like Joe to clarify the position on if we can amend this and vote on it and have it be implemented without going back to the planning commission. I'd like a clarification of that to be made to the whole commission that doesn't need a meeting.
Is there any reason we can't redline what we talked about tonight?
You took notes, didn't you?
I took some notes, yeah. There's no reason you can't redline that.
No reason why you couldn't begin on a working document, which I think is what you're talking about. And so I think those ideas need to be written down somewhere whenever
Yeah.
they're addressed.
Because I'm gonna need that if this document goes forward in some form. I'm gonna need to know exactly what those changes are so we can make those.
You can make the changes, then you would go into, you would have a document available for presentation anticipating the issues you identified today, and you could work on that then, if that's the case. Or in either way, if you agree on changes that need to be made, whether you make them or it goes back to the planning commission to begin with, it has to be written down somewhere and shown.
Is this something that each one of us who made recommendations and talked about recommendations could send to you, and then
I think you've already talked about what you want. Don't you have those?
I have, yeah.
I think
I have a lot of them but I think I'd rather have the specific language. I have your concept. And so,
Well, there's a time we could come in and visit, make an appointment with you to
sure.
see if we've covered that area.
You're not going to ask him to write it, are you?
No.
I mean, well, as long as you understand what it is that they want changed, and we do that.
Would it make sense for Mark to just draft what he heard, and then that could be sent out, kind of just, here's a draft of what I think, and see if that's what you meant?
I'm not for that at this point. Before we go to the next step of drafting this red line deal, I want to think about the things that have been talked about tonight. This thing's been taking 2.5 years. Another 2 or 3 weeks or 2 months isn't going to make any difference. And
So is the draft?
like I say, I did not come today prepared to vote on whether it's 1,500, 2,000, 2,500. And so I'm requesting some time to think about what is appropriate in my own mind.
So, Joe, I have a question. So does the draft that was presented to you tonight, which was what's gonna be sent to the Board of County Commissioners, is still gonna be sent there?
Yes.
And then you're gonna make your notes and changes and discussion between it, and you'll choose whether you're gonna make those changes or you're gonna send it back to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Is this correct?
That's what I understand generally to be the case. So if you want to make the changes, you have to have them available at that time to discuss and approve.
Discuss, and they discuss that they're gonna make the changes, or they'll have a list of the changes to send back to the Planning and Zoning Commission, whatever they choose.
Yes.
Okay.
So I see it.
Is that understood?
But right now, you need time. Am I understanding this right? There's really no, other than maybe some language, distance on things, decibels, hasn't been really decided whether that's going to change or not. It was discussed, but that's just up in the air for a later topic, more time to think about it for each of you individually. So we'll postpone bringing this to the county commission for a little bit of time until we know from the commission where you're ready, when you're ready to view it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Makes sense.
Right. I move we adjourn. Get my wife happy.
You supposed to take her out for steak or something?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Let me talk to you a little bit more.